Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are. Hosted by Desiree Duffy.
It's time for the Books That Make You show. And I'm your host, Desiree Duffy. And today we are talking about books that take you back in time to the goldfields of the Alaskan wilderness. Again. Now, you may recall that we went on an Alaskan adventure with author Neil Perry Gordon to talk about his book, Hope City. We did that a while back. Well, now Neil Perry Gordon is back with a new historical fiction tale called Cape Nome. The author has written several other books as well, such as A Cobbler's Tale and Moonflower. He's also written The Righteous One and The Bomb Squad. And Neil Perry Gordon is back. Welcome. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me again, Desiree. It's so nice to be with you.
My pleasure. Well, I love it when we talk to an author once about their book and then they have another book, especially when it's a follow-up to the first one, because it just continues that adventure for us. So why don't you start by setting the stage with the first book, Hope City, so that people that might not have read that one yet can get the lowdown on that, and then we'll segue into the new book, okay?
Well, it's all about the gold rush, and the big gold rush actually was a couple of years before that in Dawson City, which is sort of like where the story germinates, but it never really goes there. It begins in Hope, and Hope is a small little mining town, a forgotten mining town along Turnagain Arm, which is not far from Anchorage. You go up Cook Inlet, and the reason they call it Turnagain Arm is because when Captain Cook went up Cook Inlet looking for the Northwest Passage, he sent a boat down Turnagain Arm. It wasn't called Turnagain Arm. It was when the guy came back and had to turn around again and come back and saying, there's nothing there. And that's how they got the name Turnagain Arm. It's basically meant turn again. So there was two towns. There was Hope and Sunrise. Sunrise was actually the bigger city. And during in 1896, it was the most populated city in all of Alaska. Today, it doesn't even exist. It's abandoned. You can see ruins of it when you go hiking in Hope. I go up to visit Hope every summer, except for last summer because of COVID. I have very good friends there, Tom and Barbara Miller, who I've always visit, and they have a place in Hope, but they have a summer home there. So all these years going there has given me the idea a couple of years ago to write about the discovery of Hope, because the story goes is that the way that Hope got its name was from one man there in the unnamed town saying the next person who comes off the boat, we're going to name our town after that person, and that person was Percy Hope. So I am going to write the fictitious story about Percy Hope, and that's where Hope City came from.
Oh, I love that. And I want to dig into the fact that you do use real historical references and, why Alaska? Why this time? What is it about it that fascinates you about that? But why don't you start with just then giving us a little bit of the situation with Percy Hope as a character, as somebody that you've, kind of developed. What is his story? What's he doing up in Alaska? Yeah. And why should we be following him?
Well, Percy Hope's, that's not his real name. His real name is Samuel Rothman. He's a Jewish 18-year-old teenager from San Francisco who just graduates from high school. And him and his friend Liam decide to go up for the great gold rush they hear about in 1898 for the summer vacation after they graduate high school, to go and discover gold. So they talk their parents into allowing them to go, and off they go. But before they leave, the father says to the son, it's probably not a good idea to go up there with such a Jewish name. Maybe you should have more of a common name. So as they're tossing around, they come up with this idea of naming himself Percy Hope. So he goes up with this fictitious name. So it's basically he's there in this town of Hope. He comes off the boat. He's originally becomes a celebrity because he gives the name to this town, but it's not really his name. And he's living this lie. So he's living this lie throughout the whole story, which he's got to deal with at many different levels. So he's got to find himself that way. So he's living this lie, and that sort of leads into the next story, which will talk about where he's his search for the truth. So I try to have I try to develop these themes as I go along with these stories.
And this is really, it's adventure and it's a little bit of historical fiction. Describe a little bit of just those themes and those overarching, storylines that you have in this book. How did that all percolate and come together?
In Hope City? Yeah, well, you can imagine what a mining town would be like in the 1896. I mean, it was just, a free-for-all. When everyone congregates to one area for one purpose alone, to search for gold, you're going to have a common theme among many of these people. And you have different moralities among these people. So, you're going to have greed really oozing out from all different types of people. So that's the experiences you have when everyone is searching for their fortune. Other cities all throughout America or anywhere else in the world are not begun because of the search for gold, right? They're begun because people just, congregate for various reasons. Maybe geographically it works well because the waterway is there, the river is there, it's on the coast, whatever the reason cities form. These cities form for the reason of pure greed. Whereas the indigenous people living there before saw the gold laying on the ground under their feet and never touched it. Walked right by it, had no interest in it. Their theme is like, if it's in the ground, it should stay in the ground. Nothing ever good comes from taking things from the ground. And boy, isn't that the truth. So, so that's how I try to picture the psychology of the story itself. And then from there, you got bars and you got fist fights and you got, kidnappings and, all sorts of thefts and murders and whatnot. So, that's what comes when you have a common purpose of just going for the gold, literally.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. A lot of times the setting, whether it's the city or the area or whatever, place and time, space, that has a personality and is a character in a lot of books in and of itself. Right. And I love the fact that it's like you really took that to the nth degree and then explored it in so many ways. Let me ask you to dig a little bit deeper into the historical angle of it, because you've done a lot of research. Obviously, you've been there and you visit there, so you know of the area by your visits. But are you looking things up as well? Are you talking to residents? How do you do your research?
I use the Google machine, of course. Wikipedia is wonderful, lots of information. So yeah, lots at my fingertips. It did help going to Nome. Going to Hope. I did go to Nome as well, but going to Hope so many times. So, nothing can you research by actually being there and actually hiking in these trails you talk about, or being in the weather you're describing. I do it with other places I never been to, write about, but there it was so easy to describe it because I lived it. So when you feel something, you can write about it better than just showing it. So that definitely helps by having that experience. And I did go to Nome one year, went for a couple of days with my friend Tom. To visit there. So I did even have that experience too, what it was like to be in Nome, which is also quite interesting.
Oh, I bet. And so Cape Nome. So we're talking about Nome, Alaska. So tell us a little bit of how that fits into as being the second part in your story. And then later on, I understand too, there's a third book in the works. So we'll touch on that too, but let's focus on Cape Nome right now.
Right. Well, 1898, gold is discovered by these guys they call the Three Swedes, these three Swedish guys. Actually, two are Swedish, one is Norwegian. But they find a tremendous gold mine, makes them multimillionaires. And this place of Nome, Cape Nome, had no reason of anyone even being there at all. There was just a desolate outpost on the most western coast of Alaska. If Sarah Palin could actually see Alaska, that would be the place where she would have the best shot in Nome, not from where she lived. But it's really up there, and it's just below the Arctic Circle. So in 1898, these three Swedes discover gold, and of course, the world, comes to Nome. 30,000 people in this place that had nothing swarmed to this outpost in the middle of nowhere that had no infrastructure. No post office, no bathrooms, no restaurants, no nothing. How would 30,000 people just live? Just thinking about going to the bathroom or getting medicine or those types of things. So you have chaos. And even today, if you go to Nome and you go down the beach, there are people still prospecting for gold, because what happened, besides the three lucky Swedes who discovered this great find, gold was also discovered by accident in the sands on the beach. So all you had to do was put a shovel into the sand, dump it into your rock or rock it out, and you got gold dust. So they forget that, because you got it to mine the gold. You need equipment. You need a whole lots of stuff to get the gold out. On the beach, you just need a shovel and a rocker, and people were pulling out $100, $150 of gold a day back in 1898. So all of a sudden, boom, you have 30,000 people lined up, camped out for miles up and down the beach in Nome. So that is where my story begins. So Percy Hope has been back home now for 2 years, back in San Francisco. His father died of a heart attack, so he went to work in his father's general store. And he found out as soon as he started working there that things were not as, he wasn't paying his bills, and now the vendors didn't trust him any longer, so he had to close up the business. In meantime, Percy Hope was also trying to become a novelist. He wrote about his first novel was about being in Nome, being in Hope, and Jack London is someone who we befriended, and Jack London actually became the editor of his book, and also a good friend. And he ended up getting Percy a job as a journalist for the San Francisco Examiner, which was owned by William Randolph Hearst. Mm-hmm. So he gets an assignment to go to Nome and write about what's going on in Nome. So he goes on this ship, and he's going on this voyage up to Nome, all the way up the Pacific, and then through the Bering Straits. And who does he meet? He meets Wyatt Earp. And he befriends Wyatt Earp on the way, because Wyatt Earp also historically went up with his wife, Josie, in 1898, went to Nome exactly that time and opened up a hotel called the Dexter. And it was very famous at the time, very popular, because it was Wyatt Earp as a celebrity. He was in his 50s at the time, but he was still very much a personality. So my story has Wyatt Earp in it, and his wife Josie, and it's the Alaskan Adventures of Percy Hope, book 2. Yeah, some of the same characters from the first book. Magnus Vega, who was my antagonist in book 1, is back in book 2 in a very pivotal role.
Nice.
So he's back, but he's not the antagonist in the story. We have a new antagonist, who's very surprising. That I'm not going to give it away, because it's okay to learn who that is.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic. So what I like too is all of this is plausible, right? It's plausible that Wyatt Earp was met by Percy. It's all you have these characters, and it's so rich and interesting in that regard, because that could happen. That might have happened. So let's talk about the sea monster, right? Because there's a sea monster in this book.
Yeah, Koalapec is a sea monster. It's actually it's a green, slimy sea monster that was a legend that the local Inuit indigenous people there would tell their children that they would be eaten by this sea monster if they got too close to the water. So it was a way to keep their kids away from the water so they wouldn't drown, fall in, whatever. So I said, I got something juicy to work with here. So I worked the sea monster in. So, all my books have some sort of spiritual element to it. So where we're not only living in the awakened world, but we're also having experiences in the dream world, or perhaps the spiritual world. So I always try to get that in there somewhere. So my Koalapec is my monster, is my demon, so to speak, here. Because here there's certainly lots of demons in Nome, but none more colorful than the sea monster Koalapec.
That's exciting. And it's really nice and fascinating the way you pull in the Inuit culture and their legends and weave that in as well. Did you find yourself doing that a lot, looking at the indigenous people and their myths and legends and their stories, their history, to pull that into your writing as well?
I do. In fact, Moonflower, my second book, had a lot of that influence, indigenous. Hope City too. There's a lot of indigenous influence. In fact, the shaman is an indigenous shaman in the first book, and he does make an appearance in the second book as well, guiding Percy along his way. As I said before, this story has a theme of searching for the truth, and while living in all this world of lies and greed, and so it's certainly a rich pursuit when you have such an extreme in your face every day. That's what it came up. It doesn't come to me right away. The theme, it sort of develops as I'm writing it, and I see which way the story's going. And then if I could grab something philosophical like that, I like to really dwell upon it for a little bit.
It reveals itself to you as you're writing. I remember last time we talked a little bit about how you just write. You're not really a plotter in the sense that you're going to outline everything. You go by the seat of your pants a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely sit in my pants. And sometimes it gets you in trouble, and I have to just like 3/4 of what I wrote, which in this current book, I've done that because I'm like, I've totally gone in the wrong direction. And I'm like, damn. I got to rewind it, go back, cut, and then go forward again. But it's worth it because it's just so much richer, the story, that way.
Yeah, and I know that you had wanted to go to Alaska again this past summer, but you didn't get a chance to. So hopefully you get to go again. But that's where your friends are, and you were saying too that the book covers were done by the two sons. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, there's an artist in Hope. Her name is Erica Miller. And I've known her for years going up there, and I always thought she was a wonderful artist. So when I was thinking of the cover of Hope City, I said, well, Erica, if she would be willing to do the cover, that would be great. So she agreed, and then she thought to use my friend Tom, his son Sam, as his model. So Sam Miller became Percy Hope. So it's so funny because this past summer, when I didn't go up there, but my books were being circulated around, people were asking Sam for his autograph on the book because it was his image on the cover of the book. So I was like, all right, that was, at least you could get somebody enjoyment. I was trying to fulfill my ego, of course, by being there and, and getting all the glory, but, I pass it on to my friends. That's, second best.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and I'm sure that you'll be able to go back again one day, relatively soon. Yeah. And maybe when you come out with book 3, right? Because book 3 is being cooked up right now in your brain. Is that right?
It is. Actually, it's going to be in New York City in the Lower East Side in the year 1900.
Oh, okay.
So at the end of Cape Nome, the story continues, but now we're going to move to New York City. So now it's the New York Adventures of Percy Hope, book 3, down in the Lower East Side at that time. So, that's also a place and a period that I've written about a couple of times now. And it's also very fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, I assume that going to New York is a little bit easier for you to venture to, being that you're in New Jersey right now, then.
Tomorrow morning, I'll be right in New York, right exactly where I'll be writing about. Actually, I'll be in the Lower East Side tomorrow morning. Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
It's much changed. No one's pushing pickle carts down Canal Street anymore, that's for sure.
And so likewise, okay, so you know a lot about New York in this period of time too. So what can you tell us about this era of New York that we might not be aware of? You just mentioned pickle carts. I never imagined pickle carts. What's that all about?
Well, during the beginning of in the 20th century, there was a lot of immigration coming from Europe. First, it was the Irish and the Germans, and the Jewish immigrants came over. And then in the early 1900s, which was the latter of the three, were all the Jewish immigrants. And they all congregated in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And at that time, that was the largest Jewish population in the world, right in the Lower East Side. So when you congregate a religion, when we talk about congregating before for seeking gold, now we're congregating for freedom from persecution. We're congregating for a little bit more meaningful reasons than just trying to get rich. People are leaving everything they had with nothing, coming to America and search for a dream. Yeah. So what's there is really such more, some more meaningful than the reasons that people went rushing to San Francisco in the 49, or, Dawson City in 96, or Hope in 1896, or Nome in 1898. So, here we have such a variety of wonderful things going on, but it was very crowded. People lived in lots of poverty in tenement buildings. Everyone sold stuff on the street. So there were stores, of course, but everyone had carts filled with wares. Some people sold pickles, and some people sold pretzels, and some people sold, umbrellas, or, everyone had their wares. Everyone, Jews were either a Torah scholar or they were a merchant. So my great-grandfather, who came here, who I wrote about in Cobbler's Tale, he was a cobbler. His father was a cobbler. So he came here with a trade, and he was able to succeed because he had a trade, whereas a lot of his counterparts from his home city were Torah scholars. So when they came here, there was no job for Torah scholars. You if you weren't a butcher or a baker or a tailor or a cobbler or a carpenter, what were you going to do? How were you going to contribute to society? Those people who were shunned back in the homeland, back in the old city, the shtetls and such, they were shunned because they were merchants. They were looked down upon from the Torah scholars. All of a sudden, the tables are turned. And here they are now, and they're the ones who are respected. They're the ones who are getting nice homes in the suburbs. They're the ones all of a sudden with all the money and all the respect, and which made for my great-grandfather was one of those people.
Yeah. No, it's great when the tables turn like that. That's always something so fascinating to explore. What kind of advice or tips might you give to somebody who wants to write adventures or historical fiction, who wants to write in your same vein? What kind of, advice would you give to young writers?
I don't know. You need passion. You need a passion to want to do it. That's I've had some tragic events happen recently that I really don't want to share, but even through those tragic event, I'm still writing. I'm still finding, and it's not what I do for a living either. But I still write because to me that's a flame that's inside me that will never go out. So I don't know anything else to say to somebody except you really have to want it. And if you want it, then you do it. I mean, that's me. That's what motivates me. That's how I get done. And of course, when I have opportunities like this to talk about it, this is my favorite topic. So what I want to do is talk about my writing with someone like yourself. To me, it's just a wonderful way of expressing myself. And it's, I don't get to talk about it to many people who want to discuss this with me the way you do. So yeah.
Well, my pleasure. I mean, that's what this show is all about, is exploring stories and getting to know authors and getting into the themes of writing, a little bit of the craft of writing, etc. So how about telling us where people can find out more about you, find you online, social media, and of course, find all of your books?
Just go to my website. Everything is there, neilperrygordon.com. And everything is there. You can get links to Amazon. I have all my books too are also on Audible. So I have everything has been recorded on Audible. So if you want to listen to it or read it on ebook or a paperback, all different ways of enjoying what I wrote. So and if you want to, anyone who wants to read it and wants to reach out to me, I'm always happy to have conversations with people who read my books. It's like I said, my favorite topic.
Excellent. And so your books are Hope City and now Cape Nome. And there will be a third book in that series at some point in the future. Plus, you had A Cobbler's Tale, Moonflower, and The Righteous One, as well as The Bomb Squad. Those are...
And Sadie Sin.
Oh, and Sadie Sin. Thank you. Thank you. Neil Perry Gordon, thank you so much for being here today on the Books That Make You show. I appreciate you hanging out with us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me.
You bet. You bet. And thank you, everybody, for being here today. And if you would like to find out more about us, just come to our website. It's booksthatmakeyou.com. We're also on Facebook and Instagram and, of course, YouTube. Please do be so kind as to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have lots of fun stuff happening there. Not only do we do this Books That Make You show, but we are the proud sponsors of the BookFest. Check out thebookfest.com and you can find free panel discussions and conversations with authors and literary folks and people within the bookish community. And it's all free. Plus, you can sign up for our newsletter on the Books That Make You website, and you can discover free stuff. We give away free books. We have lots of news and information about the world of books as well. Until next time, all of my bookish buddies, please enjoy all of the books that make you exactly who you are.
The executive producer for Books That Make You is Desiree Duffy. Produced and sound mastered by Phil Giangrande. Engineering by Dave Nabox. Social media and promotion by Bree Sweeter. For more, visit booksthatmakeyou.com.